Hey Paint Niters, this is Rick, and I wanted to make a quick video breaking down my painting Float Away, which is a featured painting in November. It's got a lot of room for creativity. You know, I like to let the people change up the colors a little bit. I have a lot of samples over here kind of set up on this wall, so I'll just whip it around here. So here's some different versions. There's like a blue one. Here's one I actually have framed in my office. Purple. Here's like a pinkish one, and then here's a yellow one. To do this painting, I'm going to use 3 brushes. You know, I'm going to use the background brush, the what is this, a size 12 bright. Then we've got the size 6 flat, and then I use the size 6 round. Those are the only brushes I use for most of my paintings, but this one too. I use Dick Blick. We've got the chrome yellow, titanium white, Mars black, phthalo blue, and I think it's just bright red is the name of the color. So those are what I use. To start, I want a cold light gray background for the sky. So I begin with some white, just a touch of black, and a touch of blue. So we're going to start right here on the canvas up top here. And just kind of quickly start painting a little bit across the top. Now this is pretty light. People have a tendency to paint it too dark, so you want to caution against that. Okay, so once I get, I'm gonna paint the sky to about halfway down the canvas. Right, and if I can, I'm going to try and lighten it up as I go. I started pretty light, so there's not a lot lighter I can get. But I'm adding a little bit more white to my mix so that it's a little bit brighter. So you don't have to go quite halfway down, but that gives me plenty of room to work. I'm going to mix up a slightly darker version of the sky. I don't want it to be too much darker. I want it to kind of seem misty and far away. I'm going to start with just kind of a nice hill, making sure that I don't go too low to where I expose canvas. You don't really have to wait for the sky to dry for this. It's actually nice that some of the background color blends in with your hill, your mountain. In the sample painting I have 3 hills, but when teaching I find it's a little bit easier to just do 2, because timing can be an issue with this painting. Okay. Once I get the hill in there, and it's subtle, especially right now, but once it starts to dry it'll darken up. I want it to get lighter near the bottom, so again I just kind of mix in some white, try and blend it into the base. Again, I'm going to mix up a darker version of my sky color using the white, a little bit more black, and some more blue. I just don't want it to be too dark. I still want a fairly light and monotone background. Okay, so I want to make sure that I start my hill in a different place. So maybe I want it to be higher on this side and lower on this side. Okay, so I use the edge of the brush as the drawing surface. Come down and up. Start creating my hill. Again, it's okay for it to blend with the background a little bit. And again, I'm going to lighten up the base of my mountain by, or hill, whatever it is, by incorporating some white into my mix. I just work side to side. Sometimes you have to kind of wiggle up and down, get the paints to mix a little bit, and then side to side to smooth it out. What I'm going to do is paint all the way down. The idea is to get close to the sky tone. This painting can eat up a lot of white paint, so make sure you bring enough. Okay, so we kind of have our hills and our sky. We're going to start building in our trees here in a second. Alright, so for the trees we want a darker bluer mix, but basically the same formula. I'm going to start with some white. I'm using a smaller flat brush now. Start with some white, a little blue, and some black. Maybe a touch more black here. Okay, so got basically the color I want. My brush is loaded up. It's probably fat with paint. Wipe off the excess there. Okay, and I just pull it through the paint a little bit so I get a nice fine edge on my brush. Okay, and about a third of the way up from the bottom, or basically halfway through our second hill, I'm just going to draw a water line, right, most of the way across. Try and keep it level. Mine got a little crooked, but it should be okay. And then I'm going to essentially just scribble in, right? I'm just using the flat edge of the brush up and down here. Tree-like shapes, right? Just the idea of trees in the distance. You know, try and have some tall points and some low points. Don't make it too homogeneous all the way across. I also tend to taper down a little bit as I go. Alright, so now that I have the trees made, I just need to do the reflection. Reflection's easy. I'm just going to mimic the same shape underneath. Yeah, so if it's tall, I make it tall. If it's short, I make it short. So it's just basically mirroring what's going on top. It doesn't have to be exact or anything. It just needs to be somewhat close. Close enough to convince or to trick the eye into thinking that it's the same shape. Okay, so now I have the tree line here. Again, I'm going to use the same exact color and the same brush, and I'm going to go side to side to create some cuts and to create some cuts in the trees. The trick is to be really gentle and somewhat random. A lot of times people end up making like dotted lines or curved lines or pressing too hard. Really, you just want basically straight lines. Fairly thin. Varying lengths and locations. Once I get the dark lines in, I'm going to get some white on my brush, right? So I'm just white paint. And I'm going to find the shoreline first, maybe around here. I'm just kind of gently leading up the shore. And then maybe a couple just barely grazing the canvas here. I can kind of clean up any strokes out here. Now my watercolor is a little too light to really see any of the white strokes in here, but I'm going to add a couple just in case. And sometimes people have a darker color so the light stands out a little bit better, the white highlights in here. Okay, so at this point I'm going to start building in my my land that the tree is going to sit on. So to do this, I'm going to use the big brush, and I'm just going to use pure black to rough in my shape. Okay, I want to make sure that my shape is large enough to cover where my tree line cuts off, right? So, I'm going to start, maybe a third of the way up. Give it some nice forms, right? So it can be a hill or a cliff or whatever you really want to do. I'm just going to fill this all in with black. I'm going to switch back to the small flat brush, and I'm going to use black. And what I'm going to do is just hold my brush vertical up and down. I'm going to do these gentle, small, little flicking motions, similar to the way I did the trees, to create some grass texture on my hill here. So just real gentle. Because the wind is blowing, I can give everything a little bit of an angle. The key to doing this is making sure you have a good, maybe not good, but the right amount of black on your brush. And to be gentle. But I find if I just let people, if I just tell them to paint grass and kind of give them a general idea how to do it, they figure it out on their own. I change the angle of my brush just to get some different shapes. My goal here is to kind of hide the edge of my hill, so it's not a straight line, but rather a you see the top of the grass, but not the bottom of the grass. A lot of times people will space out their grass like this, and it tends to look arid or deserty. It's just very separated grass, and if it gets longer, it starts to look like beach grass. So I'm just going to go through, take a couple minutes here, and fill all this in. Some grass shapes. I always tell people try not to get too samey. So change the angle up and make sure that you have different heights of grass and things like that. I like to think of it as out in the wild. So I like to have kind of wild grass. So the little details make a difference, just adding little things here and there. I don't instruct necessarily how to do every little thing, but I tell people, you know, to add things that are meaningful to them. I've had people put in gravestones and dogs and all kinds of things to make it, you know, more personal to them. Now at this point I'm ready to start my tree. So I have everybody kind of pick out a color that they want their tree to look like. And then I tell them to find sort of the darkest version of that color. And sometimes it's a different shade of that color, a different color. So, you know, if you wanted to do purple, maybe start with a blue, like a dark blue undertone, the shadow area, and then add more red and white to do the highlight areas, so that, you know, you get a little color shifting, but it also just adds visual interest to the painting. I'm going to stick with basically the sample painting with red. So I'm going to start with a dark under red and then build up some highlight layers. I'm just going to let my foreground dry for a second and then start in on my tree. To do the tufts of the leaves, what I need to do is kind of break apart my brush. So to do that, I just tap it into the ground. Maybe it'll be easier over here. If I tap it, what happens, and I don't want to do it too hard, I don't want to ruin the brush or anything, but what happens is my brush starts to break apart. So I get this kind of real awkward shape on my brush. Okay, so I start with my base color. For me, that's going to be essentially a pure red. Sometimes I'll add in a touch of blue, just to, I don't want to do black necessarily, just a little blue, just to give me a nice dark burgundy type color here. Okay, and again I'm just tapping my brush into the paint until the bristles start kind of breaking apart in a weird way. Okay, so once I have it broken apart, I'm going to pick out the spots where I want my tree to go. So I'm just going to tap in kind of a tree shape. So maybe there's a tall bit over here, and maybe it's kind of a big one over here. You know, change the angle of the brush and you'll get some different patterns and things. Maybe one more kind of over here. Okay, so I just have a couple pieces. You know, sometimes you can add as many or as few as you want. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with that. So now I'm going to use the small flat brush again to draw my trunk. I know it seems like I'm kind of going out of order, but I find it's way easier to do the trunk once I know where the leaves are. So all I'm going to do is start with some black on the brush here. And I'm going to draw a curvy line from my top tuft down to the bottom, down to the ground here. Okay, so I feel like this one is going to kind of go around like that. So I use black, and I'm building out the trunk so it's a little thicker at the base. Now, I didn't overlap any of my tufts, but if they were in the way, I would have. So it's so once I find the kind of tree trunk, right? You can make it as big or skinny. I think this one's a little too skinny. I think we might beef it up a little bit. Right? I'm going to draw the branches. Now to do the branches, I find that a lot of people try and be real efficient. They would draw straight out, like a grid, just straight out to connect to the tuft. But you don't really want to do that. What you want to do is connect the bottom of the tuft to the trunk in a somewhat natural manner. So maybe there's a branch coming out this way, and maybe there's a little branch over here, right? Maybe there's a little branch that comes out that way. Right. So it's just about kind of helping the tufts connect to the trunk in a kind of an organic way where they flow. Okay, so that's the basics of the tree. You can make it as curvy or straight as you want. This one's a little bit different than the sample. I don't think I made it as curvy, but that's the idea. Okay, so now I'm going to start highlighting the tufts of the leaves, and the key is to do less each time. So each highlight layer shouldn't cover up the last layer, so you have to just keep doing less and less as you go, and it makes the highlight more special. The most common problems are people not aware of where the light is coming from, so they kind of highlight incorrectly or inconsistently, or they press too hard and cover up all the shadow color with their light color, and it kind of becomes a muddy mess. You don't get quite the nice break part of the leaves. So I always do the light from the top left, coming in this way, and then I'll do a shadow going out that way. So I focus on the top and left side of the tuft, and I kind of build it out and up, right? So I focus on the light edge and keep the dark edge in there. So again, I'm going to do it the same way I made the tufts originally. I'm going to use the big brush, Big Bright, and I'm going to dry it off real quick. So you can be real subtle with your highlight layers, and you know, that's fine. The more I paint this, the more I like to really push the brightness on the highlight layers. And actually I'm going to add in a little bit of yellow just to keep it from getting cold. I find that even though red's a warm color, when it goes pink it has sort of a cold touch to it, so a little bit of yellow gives it a warmth. So this should be brighter. Again, very gentle, don't overdo it. Okay, so now I'm starting to see some nice pink highlights in there. Change the angle of my brush. Okay, so I might do one more highlight layer where I get significantly brighter. A bit more yellow in there. Tap, tap, tap. even brighter. I want this last highlight layer to really stand out and be vibrant and bright. Okay, again, this is a little bit brighter than the sample. The sample is a little bit more subtle in the coloring. Okay, so on this layer here, just very gentle tap, gentle. Right, the harder you press, the more those little gaps in the bristles connect, and it leaves more paint on the canvas. And the more paint you leave, the more blobby it is. Right, so I might have overdid this a touch, but now I have a nice kind of light and dark area on my tree. So I kept it fairly subtle still. You pull back, and the highlights are pretty hard to see, but they're there, right? Now, start in on the grass. So I start with some thinner. I start out with some thinner vertical strokes along the edge. I don't need to cover up all the black that I have. I just want to get some of this texture in here. Then I'm going to turn my brush and do more of a tiny horizontal stroke. I'm going to do a bunch of these, and I'm going to overlap them. And what happens is as it starts to overlap, you get a very kind of nice grass texture. I want to leave in some of the dark spots, and I don't want to fill it in. That's sort of the point of the kind of tapping with the brush. I don't want to do the whole hill. Leave it dark near the bottom. I'm going to lighten it up with some yellow, maybe a little bit of white. And it's all about where the light's coming from, so I'm going to focus on, you know, the top area of my grass and let it get dimmer. So I might start with a few vertical type blades. Again, it's important that you don't cover up all of your undercolor. Intentionally leaving a little dark area underneath my weed here. So lots of these little rectangles overlapping each other. You start getting a nice grass texture. Not pressing very hard. And again, don't cover up all of your dark grass. So now I'm going to brighten it up even more. More yellow, more white. This will be my last highlight layer, right? And so less of that bright light is hitting these grass blades here. Okay, so you want to do just a little bit, not too much. Okay, so we've got the gist of the painting here. All that's really left is to do the leaves that are floating away. I'm going to use the round brush to do that. I have conditioner in it, so it's still stiff. The brush is still pretty stiff. I'm not going to break the brush because it's easier to get the smaller dots with that. Whatever color they did, I recommend that they use a kind of a middle tone. They don't want to use the highlight color and not necessarily the darkest color, unless it's a very light light color. Then you want to use a little bit darker so it stands out here. So I'm gently tapping these little dots. It's possible to create a pattern of dots. So I recommend doing little clusters. And then the further away I get from the tree, the fewer dots I do. It's real easy to add too many dots. So I always recommend people stop and lean back and decide if they really need to add more or not. Right? So kind of break it up into several steps here. Depending on where your time's at, you can go in and add a highlight to the tree. It's not absolutely necessary. So basically adding green to red is going to get me a brown color. I'm going to want more yellow and red in it. Start with a darker color and build up to a brighter color. So here's kind of a dark brown. I'm using the small flat brush. Okay, and I'm paying attention to where the lighting is, right? So it's the top left here. So it's going to hit the left edge of the tree. I try and do kind of a broken stroke and maybe even incorporate some of the root structure into the tree here. Alright, so I start getting a little bit of highlighting on my tree trunk here. So I'm adding white and yellow to my brown just to lighten it up a little bit. And again, with the brighter highlights, you don't do quite as much. And then you could do maybe one more layer, a little bit brighter, more yellow. Okay, so with my very brightest brown, I'm just going to come in and just a few little spots. Again, it's important to leave the shadow just as much as the highlight. It's a moderate painting. It's not so much difficult as it has a lot of steps to it. But if you break it down piece by piece, people tend to understand. I usually have a great response when I teach this painting. People do a very good job with it. You know, and they get to choose their colors, and it can work as a partner painting too if you have couples in the audience. So it's easy with all the steps to get in trouble time-wise, right? You can end up going way over if you're not careful. Don't sweat the background. Try and get through the background as fast as you can. Push through. Don't even worry about blending. You get a sense of your class and how quickly they're moving. So sometimes the slower classes, I don't even talk about blending. I just slap on the colors and get going. I try and get the whole background, the sky, the hills, the tree line, the water reflection, all that stuff done in the first hour before, you know, and then you do a break, drink and dry, whatever. And then you can, you have like an hour to work on the whole foreground and the details of the tree. I hope you guys liked the video. I hope it was informative and you understand the painting a little better. I hope the painting goes well. I think it's fun painting. I always get good results with my crowds. They almost always walk away with a painting they're pretty proud of. You know, just be careful with your time and be very clear with your instruction. Really break it down piece by piece, and you know, have fun. Keep painting, keep drinking, and keep throwing awesome paint night events. And thanks. Bye.